And here we are. Welcome, everybody, down to the lab, as it were. We're doing a little something different this week. I know last episode we said we were going to talk about Fight or Flight, but it's an interesting film, but I don't know if it's as interesting as the movie we're going to be talking about tonight. Tonight, we're looking back on 40 years of Stuart Gordon's H.P. Lovecraft's Re-Animator, a film that was recently re-released. And I can say this, it's a cliche, but it is true in this case. Truly, a stunning 4K restoration from the folks at Ignite Films. So you can get that now, and it's out. And I think there's like 4 different collectible editions. One comes with a bobblehead of the monstrosity that has Dr. Hill's head and the kind of the dummy medical dummy's head. It's all crazy, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. But Re-Animator is a movie that I had heard about a lot when I was growing up, but I didn't see it until I was well into my adulthood. And the folks I know who did see it, like sleepovers and things, they raved about it and said there's all sorts of crazy, weird science stuff and gore and nudity and just unbelievable things you don't get in a lot of horror movies. And this is back in like the mid 80s, early 90s, I'm talking. And I wonder how my friends got to see them because we were all like 10 years old. But such was the 80s and 90s. But it's adapted from a Lovecraft story, and it is Stuart Gordon's first feature film. He came from the world of stage, and he made this as a movie. In one of the behind the scenes featurettes on the disc, they talk about that whole thing of he was a first time film director and he didn't know the rules. So he didn't feel like he didn't know that he was breaking rules or not doing things the right way. And we end up with a horror comedy classic about medical school, Miskatonic University. And there's a medical student named Dan, and he's got a girlfriend named Megan, and they're very much in love, but she's the dean's daughter, and there's this whole like running around behind dad's back, trying not to get caught, trying to survive med school because Dan is on student assistance. And all of a sudden he gets a new roommate when this wacky guy shows up named Herbert West, who is a medical student, but he seems a little bit older than he should be, and he's just come from a trip abroad in Germany where something mysterious happened, and he's very much into experiencing or conquering death and bringing back dead tissue. And he's studied under this famous German doctor who meets his demise at the beginning of the film. He goes to this Miskatonic University where he's going to ostensibly learn from Dr. Hill, who is a world-renowned surgeon who may have cribbed some of his findings from the doctor that West had studied under in Germany. And now West is using the university's resources to continue his experiments while also rooming with these med students. And things go awry pretty quickly. And to say that they get out of hand, they get out of head, more likely. And it leads to a madcap, gory, fun, dark, twisted adventure horror comedy that the likes of which I can't think of much that's come around in the last 40 years that tops it. It is certainly a very influential film. We'll talk a bit about that later. But when I saw it as an adult, I instantly kicked myself saying, why didn't I watch this when I was a kid? Probably because I couldn't find it and I wouldn't have been allowed to if I was able to. But guys, Jeff York of the Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists, Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck of Special Mark Productions and the Spoiler Room Podcast, welcome. Thank you for indulging in my very long setup and introduction.
It was a great
How are you guys doing? Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was. Excellent.
Well, very, very well. Great to see you both again. And always a great hour or hour and a half spending time with you two. So thank you for having us. Thank you for having me.
Same.
Well, I think I've been had. Hey, wait.
Well, a couple of things. A bit of housekeeping before we get into it. I almost forgot. Jeff, you are, in addition to a great film critic, you're also a fantastic illustrator. And folks who may be wondering why the thumbnail for this episode looks so different than what we usually do. That's because Jeff graciously granted me the permission to use his Re-Animator caricature of star Jeffrey Combs in the classic, the needle with the green goo and the headless corpse behind him as the illustration for this episode. So thank you, Jeff. Happy to display it.
Thank you. My pleasure. And it looked really good. I thought you did an excellent art direction job on the type and the whole composition. So kudos to you, sir.
Well, thank you. I also want to give a brief shout out to Annie Banks, who couldn't be here with us tonight. She's I'm not going to get into it, but she couldn't be here with us. She's going through some stuff. So I just would like everybody to send Annie their best wishes. And certainly, you're with us in spirit. Also, Katie Glidewell, the blonde in front, all the ladies, they weren't able to join us tonight. Katie, I think, is getting ready to travel, and she was wanting to be on this panel because she's a huge horror buff. I'm surrounded by horror fans, which is the perfect group to discuss this classic with. So thank you. Mark, how are you doing?
Yeah, we're doing good. We're doing good.
Yeah.
Happy to be here, talk about this classic. This is so in my wheelhouse, as you know. We've known each other long enough. This is definitely Mark material. And our good friend Dawn, this is one of her all-time favorite films. She loves this movie a lot. She knows a lot about it. So yeah, it's fun to be here. So.
Well, happy to have you guys. Now, I want to do the thing we always do, which is, especially when we're talking about these kind of classic releases, these influential movies, I want to go back to the first time y'all saw Re-Animator. Jeff, as you often are able to do, you can bring us back there to what it was like to see this in the theater. I assume you caught it in the theater, or were you a VHS convert?
No, I was in the theater. In fact, I was really not a big VHS DVD guy for the longest of times, unless it was a movie that I really loved and I would buy it and watch it then. I mean, I didn't even watch them when they're on HBO because I felt, and I know it sounds a little bit pious, but I really do like the movie theater experience. It's bigger. It seems more important. It's fun to see with an audience, especially horror movies like this one where you get to hear people around you. I will tell you this, and it kind of came back to me when I watched it to prepare for this show, although I dare say it's one of my favorite movies, so I know it pretty well by heart. The way they sold it was as a horror comedy, and it was a very effective ad campaign. I remember even the trailer didn't give away too much about it, but it gave away some of the juicier bits, and it looked very funny and very droll. The biggest surprise for me, as I remember now watching it just yesterday, and then going back to when I saw it in the theater, it's a somewhat slow burn at first. The first 20 or so minutes takes a while to get going. In fact, I would argue that it's almost played completely straight. Like Herbert West is a little bit odd and eccentric, but he's not really saying the great lines that he has later in the film. And when everything kind of goes awry and you just can't believe, okay, they're not going to do that. No, I guess they are going to do that. Okay, they can't go any farther than this. Oh, they're going a lot farther than this kind of stuff. Because it's a slow build. It's like setting up the characters. And what's, I think in some respects, genius about it is they are set up so straight and so serious that when they do go completely bonkers with, the reanimation and everything like that, it's all the funnier because they weren't set up to be funny characters. And I'll just use Dr. Hill as the main point of that. David Gale was a soap opera actor, and so he's used to kind of those serious looks as they go in on him for the longest of time waiting to get to a commercial. But he plays it very straight, even though he's kind of skeevy and coming on to Megan, and seems to have an interest in her, and he's as accused by Herbert West, a plagiarist, but he doesn't play it over the top. There's no teeth gnashing or metaphorical mustache twirling as a villain. So it's this build for 20 minutes, and even the cat's death is kind of treated sadly. And I don't like it when animals are killed in horror movies. They're a little too easy to kill them off first. But when they finally do get the 20-minute mark in and the cat attacks Herbert West in his basement, all bets are off, because it's like, oh my God, it plays like something out of the Carol Burnett show. I mean, he's got this bad prop on his thing. He's like, oh, whoa, yeah. and yet when it's done, they're again completely straight back to this is serious. And by the time Dean Halsey's going, all over the place, after he's been attacked. The audience was crying with tears, but I think it was doubly funny because we weren't really expecting it to be as funny as that. The indication of the ad campaign was that it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek comedy. It was a little more the way sort of black comedies are often done, and the way they're sort of delivered is they're straight. The humor is in the craziness of it, which is true here as well. But it goes so bonkers, and it does so well as it does. And I will just say this, and then I'll be quiet I'm sorry. But the one thing I will say that I remembered too at the time, and I'll reminded of it now too, is like, boy, they didn't really have any sacred cows. And I'm not saying that, there have to be any in horror or, certain adventures in films in large part anyway. But, like if it's like, well, you don't want to kill the nice family pet. Well, they do that here. And then they do all these other things. You're like, they're not going to do that. They're not going to have, we're talking spoilers. We're not going to see the head trying to give head. Yes, we are. We're not going to have him, Dean Halsey throwing around this dignified man who's, trying to be a respectful father and keep the university going, tossed about like a rag doll. And that's the actor doing most of these crazy bits.
Really?
I mean, can you imagine Stuart Gordon sitting down there and saying, okay, now, Robert Sampson, I know that you've had a long history in theater and off Broadway and television and stuff, but here I just want you to be a drooling maniac. And, like you keep thinking they can't add more blood to the drool. They can't add more drool to the blood. Yes, they can. And so it's just funny that it gets weirder and raunchier and grosser and in some respects scarier, but it's my jaw was open again watching this, as it has been every time I see it. Like, I can't believe they went as far as they did.
Let me ask a quick question. Do either of you, I know we've all got the internet open in front of us, but off the top of your heads, this is an old guy challenge. When did the Pet Sematary novel come out?
Oh, the novel?
Ooh, it's a good.
Was that in the late 70s or was that in the 80s?
I think it was
the 80s
because
Stephen King's first stuff that was most famous was in the mid to late 70s. Like I think Carrie was his first book, and then The Shining was, I think, his third book. I forget what his second book was. Oh no, Salem's Lot was his second.
Salem's Lot, yeah.
Yeah, and then Shining. So I think it was in the 80s that
it was 83. I just looked it up.
Okay.
I was gonna say, it was early 80s for that, because it didn't take long for them to adapt that. They were like, oh, Stephen King, new book. Hey, all right.
Right.
And I know Lovecraft preceded Stephen King, but I'm just talking like in the language of movies, because I'm jumping way ahead here. And spoilers, again, this movie is, 10 years away from being a half century old, so you have no one to blame but yourselves. But it's got such the Pet Sematary ending where at the last moment, like Dan and Megan have just escaped this morgue of horrors, and they're in the elevator, and this one last zombie thing jumps through and strangles her to death. And that's sort of a comedic moment, because Dan goes to get the fire axe, chops its hand off, or chops everything off except the hand is still attached to the throat.
Yeah, right.
And that's what ultimately kills her. After she's pronounced dead in the hospital, he decides to use the serum, and he injects it. And there's that great moment where he puts the needle in, the screen cuts to black except for the green goo that's inside, and then you see it kind of disappears as it's suppressed.
Exactly.
And then there's a beat, and then there's the scream as she comes roaring back to life. It's such the ending of Pet Sematary, both the novel and also the movie that came out a few years later, that I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg thing, if King was ripping off Lovecraft, or because I don't think I've read the Lovecraft story in a long time, so I don't know if there's any kind of that tie to it either. But it's just, I love that kind of connective tissue in movies. I also like that these creatures, when they come back to life, there aren't any rules, because in this true spirit of science, there's experiments constantly going on. Like a little bit of serum, the amount that we put into the cat, if we put that same amount into a person, it doesn't really work. So you got to give them more. And depending on when they die, they'll either come back as a drooling or screaming maniac, or in the case of Dr. Hill, he comes back as a fully sentient, although not quite as capable doctor with psychic powers and a vengeance.
Well, the thing is, and that's, I was talking to Dawn about this after I watched this disc release that Ignite Films put out, which is just gorgeous. It literally is. Being a physical media guy, I'm just like, oh my God, the extras on here. But watching it again, I watched the integral version, which is 10 minutes longer than the unrated version.
Oh.
And in the integral version, because after watching it, I asked her, I'm like, was there more of this? And she's like, no, there wasn't as much. In the integral version, they have a subplot where Carl Hill has this power to hypnotize with his eyes, almost a Dracula. He's almost like a Christopher, and it's literally shot similar to like Hammer Christopher Lee, except they don't light up just his eyes. They kind of light up his whole face, or, you know, a Dracula type of thing, to where he is able to assert his will onto people. So, and the thing is, watching it, it helps make things a little bit more sense, because he uses it on Dean Halsey, making him, because after he does that, Dean is now very aggressive towards the young man and her relationship. He uses it even a little bit on Megan, and he uses that ability of hypnosis actually on Herbert West. There's a scene, which I think they trim out, of why Herbert West relinquishes his notes and allows Carl Hill to look at his research. They actually just have a little bit in there to where he does his mind mumbo jumbo type of thing, his hypnosis thing. And Herbert West actually goes, oh, sure, here's my notes. And you're like, wow. And I didn't remember that subplot. And I asked her, and she's like, yeah, no. And then I looked online, and yeah, the integral has this subplot to where they don't explain where he has it. He just has this power of hypnosis, which, according to Dawn, was talking about how H.P. Lovecraft does have this kind of clash of mystic magic versus science magic going on. And that's what you kind of have here. So it explained a few things before that kind of left it, you know, a little bit more open. Whether or not, you know, you like that version or not, I thought it was an interesting subplot that they had cut out that added to a little bit of why he was able to control the zombies at the end more, and why he was able to be very more coherent in his because even being brought back fairly alive, Dean Halsey was still kind of, you know, and here,
but he was also tossed around really bad.
He was tossed down around.
Probably brain damage just hitting the wall how many times, and the door being stomped on. I mean, it's just unbelievable. You know, 1 second he's dignified looking for his daughter and her boyfriend, and the next he's being tossed about like a rag doll.
That crunch of Peter Kent coming through the door and then like stepping on Halsey. But Mark, real quick.
Yeah.
I got to watch the integral version, because I didn't realize that was what the other cut on here was. I thought it was just the theatrical. But I will say, in principle, that's a fascinating idea about Dr. Hill, but I hate it.
No, I know, because there isn't much explanation of how he does it. And you know, I'm thinking back to the I'm thinking back to the other cut, and I understand why they cut it. I just thought it was kind of an interesting angle that they gave, you know, a slightly different feel to everything. But it is, I will fully admit, it's not needed either, because they cut it well enough to, you know, for you to buy into it by that time, because of the way the world is painted in this movie.
It's a testament to, now I don't know if they filmed the integral cut and then filmed other segments to make it work when they realized they were going to ditch that subplot, or if they just took that material out and edited around it, because I think it's a testament to what they did have, that not knowing that there was a whole psychic subplot, everything still makes sense. Even the Dr. Hill stuff about him being able to control his body, it's not something you really think about or intellectualize until after the movie's over. You're just kind of like, well, it's his body. He can, you know, make it do what he wants. But even the thing of like Hill giving over his research, I mean, West giving over his research, Hill essentially blackmails him. He's like, well, I'm me and you're you, and I've got pretty good evidence that you've been killing people, so hand it over and I'm going to take all the credit.
He's also, as a character, supposed to be this guy who gets grants for them and has a certain charisma, or at least aptitude and power and station, right? I mean, and casting that actor, I mean, he's tall, he's, you know, got sort of this lantern jaw. He's got a certain presence. He almost acts like he could be. Well, he's the actor is actually British, so maybe that's part of the bearing. But I think it just comes off as the character is no dumb bunny. He may be a plagiarist, but he's still got some real, presence and qualities, and that seems to play just as that in the movie without those extras.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's the other thing about David Gale is I didn't know him from anything except Re-Animator, but if he had survived long enough to be in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, or no, it was Episode 3 when they had Grand Moff Tarkin, they could have, because he does have a striking resemblance in some ways to Peter Cushing, and that's one of the things that I came to appreciate in the years between watching Re-Animator for the last time to just this afternoon, is watching all of the Peter Cushing Hammer Frankenstein films and seeing that DNA kind of threaded through this movie, because Herbert, if in a perfect world, maybe in the world of AI filmmaking, someone's going to make a crossover between, the Peter Cushing Frankenstein and Herbert West as played by Jeffrey Combs to make the ultimate Frankenstein Re-Animator crossover. I would love to see that.
That's a great idea. Really funny,
But right,
like he time travels almost, like, I'm going to go back and show Dr. Frankenstein where he was wrong.
Well, you're doing HP Lovecraft, so you easily could do a portal, and he could travel.
Exactly.
Because that was in HP Lovecraft's world.
And you know who has to stop him? Hellboy. No,
Hellboy. There you go.
Hell yes.
So Mark, I didn't get to your answer. When did you discover Re-Animator, and what was your kind of impression of it?
Oh yeah, cable kid. I mean, this was 85, so it was on cable by 86. So yeah, I saw it when I was 10, 11 years old, late night cable. I watched it, and for me, because even though we're kind of in a second horror renaissance, as I've mentioned before, in the last, say, 8 years, we've seen a resurgence of horror, and it's been beautiful as a horror fan to watch that it's worked its way back into pop culture in a way, and people are embracing a genre that after the 80s and mid 90s, when after the Scream and it really got saturated, it kind of tapered off for a while. But 85 is like one of the peak, from like 85 to 88 was like peak horror. That's where a lot of your influential and classic horror, you had this new generation of horror filmmakers that were all influenced by the classic horror guys, but it's the 80s now. We could do everything in excess. So I watched Re-Animator for obvious 11-year-old reasons. Okay. Gore and Barbara Crampton. Okay. The story was okay. It was kind of goofy, but I fully admit that when I was young, whenever it was on, I'd watch it because I knew it was going to get goofy from when the cat goes on. As I got older and watched it more, I appreciated the story more and the performances of everyone involved, and really grew to appreciate how, for the type of film this is actually really well done, acted. I mean, like we mentioned, edited. The way the story plays out, by the time you get to the cat and into the wilder things, you're in this world enough where you've accepted the way things are, so they can do just about anything and you're rolling with it by that point. So when you get to, Carl Hill with walking around holding his own head, you're laughing, but at the same time, when he straps Megan to the table, that's scary. That's tense. You're like, wait, this is disturbing, and he's sitting there going, and then he raises his severed head, and puts it next to her, so he licks her face. You're like, this is creepy.
It's one of those big, because he goes, like, on his way down, he goes all the way down.
Yeah.
And I just, watching it today, I kept thinking about the making of this and just how uncomfortable. I mean, Crampton and Gale, they're professional actors, but she was quite young at this point, so I could just imagine, like, being naked and with this bloody head, doing all this stuff and kissing all the bits. Just what that must have been like. I would never
Actually,
ask
I've
her
got
that
a
question.
good anecdote for you. In fact, one of the
Oh,
rare
no.
times I can actually sort of do one of those sort of name dropping kind of things. But Barbara Crampton was on The Young and the Restless for a number of years, and my brother was costume designer on that. And one time when I was out in LA for a television production as a creative director in advertising, I got to go and spend a day with my brother on the stages of YNR, and I met Barbara Crampton and talked to her about this movie. And she said when she was first reading the script, obviously she's a young actress, she wants to do a role, it's a movie, it's a big deal. She was worried about it, as all the actors were, because it was, unseemly. But with not only the director but the other actors that she was working with, including David Gale, kind of said in some respects he had it worse because he's the guy who's got to make it real and scary and icky, right, and all that stuff, that they kind of realized that it was fun. It was part of this odd and wonderful script they were doing. But also, I forget if she just came to it on her own or not, but I think she realized that this would always live in infamy as sort of notoriety of a certain sort, sure. But also there's a bravery to it. And she did that. And she was willing to do it, and she commits to that. And to your very point, when she's being attacked, she's not laughing with us like she knows this is silly and ludicrous. She's screaming like she's being raped. And and it's pretty scary, and she's very convincing, and she's very sympathetic, and we're kind of horrified with her. As funny at the same half of our other side of our brain, we're kind of two brains on this, that it's both kind of realistic and horrifying and outrageously funny in some respects too. But I think it helped her. She got a lot of great roles, and because she was kind of this daring actress, and she stayed in the horror genre and done some excellent work, and lasted as an actress now in her fourth decade or whatever it is. So good for her. But she said it was a little bit weird at first, like, do I want to do this? And I'm going to be known as that girl who did that scene. It's like, yeah, but if David Gale is doing it and it's everybody's first kind of big movie, go for it. And they all did. And I think it's only enhanced them, all of them, for being so brazen about it, Well,
it reminds me of, and there's so much to talk about here, but 2 years after this, we get Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn, where that's another kind of horror comedy. And it's sort of a remake of Sam Raimi remaking his own kind of horror classic, and doing the double header of like making a classic low budget, truly messed up horror film, and then coming along and making one of the great horror comedies 7 years later. But within that film, he redoes the girl getting dragged out into the woods and being assaulted by the tree, and that there's nothing funny about it. It's scary and it's intense, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrifying. That's the same thing in Re-Animator. You get the bizarre image of the head like going down in between the legs, and Herbert West, I think, barges right in
just before,
moment, right?
Yep.
But you're right, it is intense, and you realize that it's not just Barbara Crampton, it's the Megan character, because she's had several run-ins with Dr. Hill throughout the film, and you get the impression throughout her life, because he's been a fixture at this university. Her dad's the dean or whatever. So how long has Dr. Hill been like leering at her for possibly a decade or more, which is poses its own kind of problems, but now she can't get away, and he's dead but somehow immortal and very strong, and she's strapped to a table. It's like this island. Usually in movies there's like an island of levity amidst the horror. This is an island of horror amidst the horror.
Well said.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with the Carl Hill character, and that's why this film, I think, has lasted as long, and it's so affects people and is a favorite one, because for the type of film this is, you don't expect a subplot, but they set up Carl Hill as this creeper from the start towards Megan. He talks about to her dad how beautiful his daughter has become. He's made a few mentions, and David Gale is such a great actor. He just gets this look like, okay, you're being creepy old dude here. We're catching that vibe. And they set that up. And then before we get her on the table trapped by decapitated Hill, Dan, her boyfriend, finds a folder that Hill had in his office that had a piece of her hair and articles and pictures from when she was a kid. And all of these little elements add up to where by the time you get to the part where the head is assaulting her, you laugh just at first and you're like, this guy's been a creeper the whole, and then you get really skeeved out. But I think you don't necessarily get as that level if you don't have those little breadcrumbs leading up to it, because you get those breadcrumbs leading up to it, you're like, oh, this is more than just guy who's been twisted by being reanimated. He was like this beforehand, which adds that extra level.
You'll remember too, he gives the final toast before she toddles off to go to study with Dan, and the toast at the dinner, which she says, don't you want to stay for this marvelous feast or whatever like that, is a toast to her. You know, he can't contain himself right in front of her boyfriend. He's doing it. And it's very skeevy.
Yeah. And I think those breadcrumbs help to make that scene more impactful, because it adds more than just, oh, creepy zombie guys assaulting her. You're like, no, this guy's was creepy before, and now he's just finally pulling the trigger on this, and it adds that later extra just like towards the Hill character, but it also sets up his motivation to where it's not just out of left field.
Well, it's also, I think, it helps change the way that we feel about Herbert West, because from the beginning scene of the movie, which takes place in the institute in Germany, where he's been experimenting on his mentor, and the experiment has not worked out, and then he gets kicked out and goes to Miskatonic. You're like, okay, he's the villain of the piece, and he sort of is, because in that sort of Cushing Dr. Frankenstein vein, he's not Cushing's Frankenstein grew progressively darker and more maniacally evil as the movies went along, because there's a whole series of these Frankenstein Hammer films that are very loosely connected and sequelized. It's not official, like, oh, this is part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you kind of follow some of the through lines and some of the recurring characters and some of the references, you can build a bit of an overarching narrative. But in Re-Animator, the case Re-Animator, West is twisted, but he's not necessarily evil at the start. He's just obsessive and single-minded. It's not even clear what he wants to do with this knowledge. He just wants to prove that he can reanimate dead tissue and then the next step is like sentience. Like, we did this with the cat. Can we do it with a person? Can the person come back and have self-awareness? And then what's the next step after that? And I think some of the later movies, he continues his experiments and, it gets some grander ideas about the soul or something. I haven't seen them in a while, but the point is, you've got this antagonist, but then you've got the super villain, the person who's even darker and more twisted and darkly ambitious in a way that West isn't necessarily at this point. And so you've got the main bad guy who has to be defeated is not the guy that you thought would have to be the problem at the beginning of the movie. And also West gets his just desserts at the end, or so we think, in a crazy sequence where, is it Hill's body or is it
it's Hill's body. Yeah.
Okay. The headless lumbering corpse, the overdose of the green serum that all of a sudden opens up like a portal to hell or something. And there's tentacles coming out of it. Like, where did that come from?
Well, it was an intestine. It was his intestine, but
right. But
it was also not to H.P. Lovecraft, I think, because of
right. This thing was a very tentacle-like intestine. Yeah. And just before Dan and Megan escape, Hill is like, or West is like, my notes, and he throws the notes and just out the door. So setting it up for a sequel, not necessarily with the character of Herbert West, but it turns out he does survive somehow.
One thing you said though, Ian, if I may, I know I'm sorry, I didn't want
to
finish your thought. Well, I was going to say I want to build on something you said because it's an excellent point. and it actually ties into what Mark said too about breadcrumbs, is it's clever how the script and the film continues to lay breadcrumbs about Herbert West too. Like every time you want to just say, well, he's nuts, or he's selfish, or he's a maniac or manic or whatever, they'll do things that show that he's got some conscience or a bigger picture, even though he seems very focused. When he gets mad at Dr. Hill in front of the other students, he's like, you're shutting down thought. You're shutting down questions. This isn't good for the class.
Mm-hmm.
He's mindful of these other students who are trying to become better doctors. It's not just about himself. When the cat is killed, there's a famous bit where, Dan says, well, why is he here? And why didn't you write a note? And Herbert West says, he was working. He was, working to pay for his school at pushing dead cadavers around in the hallway. And then he said, and what would I write on a note? Dan, cat dead, details later.
Yeah.
And that's a funny line, but it's a good line. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, okay, it's never good to have the dead cat in the fridge and, somebody else, but hey, they were sneaking in his room and he was going to tell them. And, he's a hardworking, caring about his other students. I give you the secret to life, and here you are trysting with a bubble-headed co-ed. And that's a little bit dismissive of her, I grant you, but he's basically right at the point. It's like, this is what you're using all these occurrences that have happened, and now you've come back to life, but you've got to satiate your savage side. Herbert West has those breadcrumbs of humanity that they lay out nicely through the story.
Right. And I think that's what makes Herbert West an interesting character. And I would go so far to say even that he's not evil as much as morally gray in that he's not evil because his intentions, if you look at the motivations of nearly everything that he's doing, it's not so I can take over the world or anything. He wants to be remembered. He wants to prove that he's intelligent and he has this formula. So he's got this drive to prove himself, and it'll do whatever it takes, but it's not for the evil purposes. Unlike Carl Hill. Carl Hill is more evil, to where Herbert West is more in that gray, because like you said, Jeffrey, there's a bit breadcrumbs where he does show, a bit of humanity, a bit of restraint, or like he wants to include Dan in on it, but he's not including Dan in to corrupt him. He wants an audience. And he wants to prove that, hey, I'm a smart guy. I've beaten death and I can't show anyone, And
he kills Dr. Hill to that point when Hill brags after seeing the reanimated tissue of the cat under the microscope lens.
Right.
This is going to make me famous. Right. Like all he's thinking about is his own ego, his own needs and stuff, and that drives Herbert West mad. Because if anything, Herbert West is maybe trying to get on the level of God in a way. I mean, that's what Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and everything was about,
right?
And those kind of things, where Dr. Hill just wants to become a celebrity.
Well, but I mean, that's the thing. I think we're talking about essentially two sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
I would call Herbert West evil. Perhaps, shades of gray, sure, but there's no escape. Mark, everything you used to describe him, there's nothing altruistic about it. Whether or not he's doing it for fame or fortune or just to see if he can, he's including Dan on it, but there's also that sort of level of blackmail. He's got something over everybody who is helping him to achieve his ends, whether or not they want to or not. And he's using the resources of the basement. He's holding it over like, well, you could tell everybody about what I'm doing down here, but I can also go to the dean and say, hey, have you seen your daughter lately? So
I'm not saying he's a good guy. I was just saying that he doesn't he's not like Carl evil. He
definitely becomes more twisted as the series goes on.
Yeah, as the series goes on. In this film, he's not, but there's those seeds of, I can see where he comes right out and is as bad as Hill later on.
Right. I think that's that nuance that's really fun in the script, because if he had been that, if he had the same motivations as Hill, I don't think his one-liners and kind of wry deliveries would have been as funny,
Yeah.
because we're not on his side, but we can't not be compelled by what he's trying to do,
Right.
and the kind of disastrous cartoon effects, because
Right.
he's doing all this stuff, he knows it's wrong, and it kind of karmically keeps coming back to bite him.
Yeah.
He's got Hill's head freshly back to life, and he's so thrilled because he's talking, and he says, "You," and he's writing down, "you bastard," and right after he gets bastard out, the body comes up and slams him behind the head. He does that beautiful cartoon thunk right onto the table. It's so good.
I love him tapping the pencil like he's just sort of nervously thinking and stuff, and then the eyes open on Dr. Hill. So,
what is his fascination with pencils? In that first
I know.
class scene with Hill, he's like,
"Get a pen."
I love it.
also,
go ahead.
in addition to the horror renaissance of the 1980s, we also had the classic slobs versus snobs from like the 70s up through the 80s comedies.
Right.
And that scene where Jeff, you mentioned he tells off Hill in front of the class, you're stifling knowledge. It reminded me of the scene in Back to School from a year before, where Thornton Mellon starts going into the real world economics during his economics class. It's like,
you got to grease the palm of the mob. You're not going to get
Teamsters,
those permits. The Teamsters. Or going back even to 78 with Animal House, where they were to me the novelty, the novelness or the fun of Animal House is that they were also idealistic in the early 60s with the hands coming together and the Kennedy float and all that kind of stuff. And then of course they're already sort of playing it for selfishness, but also the ostensibly leaders turn into bad guys by the end, where they're killed by their own men in Vietnam or raped in prison because they were a Watergate aide. I mean, it's some of those kind of things where the shifting a little bit of who's exactly good or who's exactly bad. Again, to your point, it's a great one. He had Herbert West, ostensibly in any other kind of movie, maybe before this, would have been the Vincent Price character who becomes the madman, like in House of Wax. His business partner wants to get the insurance, so he burns all his creations. But then, of course, Vincent Price is running around grave robbing and killing people to put them into his thing. And Herbert West would be that here, but he's at least our bad guy versus Dr. Hill, who's really hissable.
He's the charismatic bad guy. It's like, I don't exactly approve how you're going about some of these things, but I am fascinated by your drive and your core intention. How he goes about his core intention. You're like, but then you're like,
and he didn't want to leave that cold note. So you got to respect him a little bit,
But the thing with the pencils implies that he's still old school too, because he writes down his notes. They have the recorder, but I think that it's just a little bit of a, implied, especially back in the 80s, because they wanted to use pen on everything. That was the big, remember, I don't know if you remember when you were a kid, but that was the big thing when you got into like high school. It was like, use a pen. They didn't want a pencil. They wanted a pen. So you went from elementary school where you were using pencil to, nope, you get into middle school to high school. No, you need a blue and black pen as part of your school supply, and not necessarily a pencil.
Mark, you're pointing to me as Dr. Herbert West then, because I still use a pencil and a pen then to draw. I do not draw anything electronically, just to bring it all back to that art card.
Well, and I have some of the original pieces to prove it. Thank you, Jeff. But I gotta say, to put a button on that point, Mark, about the transition from grade school to high school, there was a surefire way to get around that dilemma, which is to just don't do the homework. Worked for me.
0.0.
Yeah.
Were you looking at my records?
It's a perfect score.
Those two actually had locks of hair in them. Anyway, no, I want to talk about Bruce Abbott for a moment.
Sure.
Our Daniel Kane character. The thing that struck me about this in that 20-minute setup that you mentioned, Jeff, because it is something unique in a horror movie. This is a horror movie that stood out from its contemporaries of the mid 80s. It's not a slasher movie. It's a full-on gore fest, but it's about adults. They're young adults. They're med school students. They're probably in their early 20s. But I think about the horror movies that we're watching nowadays that are also ostensibly about people in that same age range, and they all look and behave like they're 12. The college students in Re-Animator, they dress like adults. I mean, yeah, it's like the Reagan 80s and everything. So you got the sweaters and the button downs and everything, but just the way they're talking to each other when Dan is talking about, he's professor or Dean Halsey is threatening to take away his scholarship or his student aid. And you can see that real panic. Like that's the genuine horror of this horror movie for Daniel Kane, is not being able to afford med school anymore because he's really passionate about it.
Right.
These are adult, like, real world concerns. And so when they're confronted with this crazy mania of the dead coming back to life, you kind of take it more seriously rather than just being dumb, unaware teenagers who are just trying to get in each other's pants.
Smart. Yeah, it's despite it going crazy, they march towards that craziness very deliberately.
Right.
The last 10 minutes are not as crazy as the next 10 minutes. And they start on 1 and get up to 10. And if they started at 11 and then try to take it to 21, it might have just been all silliness and maybe you'd lose interest in it. But yeah, they set up this real character who's got some real stakes just to lose his chance to become a doctor. And also, I think to your very point, Ian, it shows that he is a serious med student, because not only is he realizing that that's his whole dream and gambit, but also he's attaching himself to Herbert West because he senses that this guy is doing some interesting work. Like, he's really trying to find what's going on, and can brain tissue or bodies be brought back to life. And I think it keeps him a little bit by his side because, this is it's almost like Unforgiven, the reporter who's trying to find the person to write about, and it isn't English Bob and it isn't Little Bill, it's Will Money, like, yeah, that's right, I have killed children. And the reporter's getting excited, like, oh my God, he's writing my prose for me. Same here with Dan. He's saying, wow, this is the sort of visionary doctor that might change the world. And I'm sort of wanting to do that as somebody who wants to do some good too.
Well, they set that up with Dan right away when we first are introduced to him. He's overextending CPR on a woman, trying to bring her back to life because he really wants to bring her back to life. He wants to save people. As passionate as Herbert West is to prove that he has a formula that will bring tissue back to life. Not necessarily, I want to bring people back to life. Yeah, he just wants to prove that he's smart and that he beat death. Here we have Dan's motivation of hooking up with Herbert because he's like, I could use this for good. I could actually help people alive. I mean, Herbert uses that to convince him to help him because Herbert knows what type of guy Dan is. He's like, think of all the people you could help with this, And
it bookends. The movie bookends because he can save the woman, also happens to be his girlfriend, the same way he was trying to save the woman in the first scene and could not. Now he has the skills, if you will, in the world of science to do so.
And you know what they don't do in this movie? They don't have a scene where Dan explains that because he had this traumatic incident on the table that he wants to do, bring people back to life so he can redeem himself. It's all in the subtext. And even at the end of the film, he's gone around the bend because he has to know, based on everything that he's seen, that injecting Megan with that reanimation serum is not going to end well. But he does it anyway, whether it's for selfish reasons or he's just despondent or he's gone a bit insane. But Bruce, I think, even plays that understated, where he just looks so defeated. He doesn't quite know what else to do.
It may not be the best solution, but at least it gives him a chance of a solution, because otherwise she's just dead.
It's like the end of that cemetery where he's like, well, my wife, she's not going to try and kill me,
and that's the thing is here Dan gets that little glimmer of hope going, well, Carl Hill actually had his faculties when he came back alive, so and he was immediately resurrected. So in some respects you think Dan is like just got this little glimmer of maybe this will, because he's got the means, and if he didn't try, he would question himself for the rest of his life. At least if he tries and she comes back, you know, he may have trouble dispatching her. Someone else will have to probably dispatch her, but he will have tried at least, and then he can mourn, you know. But he otherwise he'd be worse off if he didn't use the serum. It's, you know, and that's what is odd, because you look at this going, oh, Re-Animator, this gory, crazy film, and you're like, no, these characters got some depth. They got some level to them. You've got some stuff to them.
Well, and that's what I appreciate about it. I mean, it's not a straight adaptation of the Lovecraft story,
right,
because it's set in the 1980s, right?
Yeah.
But it at least pays tribute to Lovecraft by being about something, having themes, having subtext, having real characters, encountering real horrors. So I'll take that over, you know, just a slapdash, you know, based on your adaptation. I'm going to stop talking. I'm tripping over my words.
Not at all. No, you said some great things, Dean. But I think also to your point too, like, you know, you think about another movie of that era that was a great film. Obviously, everybody knows it is the Terminator. Now, in the Terminator, you had a villain who is explained, because they have to for Sarah Connor as well as for the audience, that he's unstoppable. He's got one mission, and that is to end her. And it's his only objective, and he will do that whatever it takes. And even if he's, you know, removed of all the tissue and the stuff that makes him seem like he's a human and to nothing more than a claw, he will keep coming at her. That's a very black and white villain, which is great for that story. I mean, the nuance and the complexity of it is elsewhere. But what I liked about this one too is they have these, to your point, all this gore and this blood is going on around them, and yet the characters in it act like, okay, well, that's what the reality is at this moment, you know.
Right.
And even Herbert West trying to say, like, well, you know, we can keep Dean Halsey around and see what happens with him. It's like, this man has just been mercilessly killed, but I'm a doctor. Let's make something out of this so it isn't a totally wasted moment.
Right.
And I also love the fact too that if you get down to some of the brass tacks in this movie, there's rationale that most horror movies don't even try to. Like, we talk about this all the time, like, what happened to this and how did they get here, and this doesn't make any sense, and did we miss a reel? But I love the fact that by, you know, basically separating Hill's head with that god-awful shovel, and you hear that crunch and like, ugh, it's awful, and then you see the plop kind of falls away from the body. But of course, his vocal cords are severed, so he doesn't have the ability to speak very well. You know, that's why, like this. He's talking from the back of his throat. But that tongue action, that muscle is its own independent operator, not dependent upon the neck. That's perfectly useful. But that makes logical sense. As crazy and gruesome as that is, it's like, okay, so what do we do now? Well, we want him to talk, but he wouldn't talk well because he's got severed vocal cords. It's kind of smart.
I also like that it's kind of implied because it's all pantomime, but when his head is first in that tray. First, I like when Wes is trying to prop the head up and it keeps falling over. So just use the little note spike.
Right on it.
But Hill's body takes a blood pack out of a fridge and then squirts it into the pan to kind of like almost like lube up whatever's left of his vocal cords to make it a little bit easier for him to talk. He's kind of stewing in his own juices and fueling up, as it were. It's just, I don't know if it makes any sense, but the movie goes out of its way to say this is a process that's happening. We're doing this thing, so pay attention to this, and maybe not some of the loopholes that we're leaving wide open.
That's what's even great about Herbert West, showing you his drive in the fact when they revise, I think it was when they revise Halsey, and he's going kind of berserker. Herbert's up close taking notes, like, oh, he's like, how's he feeling? Can you say something? Because he is a true Dr. Frankenstein scientist in that he does not want to waste a single opportunity to get data to help improve his product or get an understanding of everything that is happening, because you get the feeling that part of him doesn't quite understand fully yet how this serum that his mentor, made, and he's trying to really understand it and refine it, but you can only do that with data. So you're going to go up to the guy who's going to try to hit you and kill you going, can you say something? Go ahead, say something. Speak, he's like...
Well, and and to that point, Mark, this is kind of unrelated, but kind of not. I want to make a book recommendation to everybody out there. Edward Ashton's Mickey 7. That title may sound somewhat familiar because there was a Bong Joon-ho movie that came out a couple months ago called Mickey 17. This is the novel that it was adapted from. And I'm about 100 pages away from finishing this, and I'm getting more and more incensed with every chapter because it is a masterpiece of science fiction that they completely dropped. I would say, I think Bong Joon-ho and his team had something against the author of the novel because what they did to his work is an abomination. But the reason I bring this up is because that is very much about this expendable space crewman on this deep space kind of like colonizing planet seeding mission. They keep putting him through these dangerous experiments and these weird jobs to see what will happen to, if one of the other colonists has to go outside and repair something on the outside of a starship or encounters this poisonous gas. It's very intelligent, and it is actually about science. And that's what I love about Re-Animator. The sequels kind of go off the rails in a lot of ways, but this first movie is very pure because it's actually about something, kind of like the movie Real Genius, which came out, I think, around the year before this. It's about kids at smart science college, and they're secretly building government weapons, and it's all these like ethical problems. So these are not just dumb 80s teen comedies and horror movies. They're really about something, and I think that's why we come from, I'll say collectively, the true greatest generation, at least pop culturally speaking.
It was also back in the time when I think you could do homages and nods and references to it without having to wink underline it with a yellow highlighter.
Oh yeah.
I mean, obviously the head in the pan is a nod to that classic, I dare say, C movie, The Head That Wouldn't Die.
Oh yeah.
Where the man, the doctor saves his wife's head from cruising around the countryside in their rag top. And she's talking the whole time to him, and they did the voice there, but she's in the pan and, he's talking to her, writing notes for science. Obviously, there's a nod to that here without having to make it like, oh, I'm referencing this. It's like most people probably might have gotten it if they're a horror fan. And if they don't, it's just clever. And obviously, Lovecraft was parodying Mary Shelley when he wrote the original book. And this pays a lot of homage to Frankenstein, and we always call it Frankenstein, but it's the creature in that, and the real villain, of course, is the doctor. And here's sort of our version of that with West. But there's lots of nods to classic horror stuff and smart ideas of those things without it being wink this is all a joke, and I'm really just doing it for those 10 people out in the audience who are my friends who will get this.
Well, look at. Oh, go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, I didn't know the whole head in the pan thing. The head that wouldn't die. I got to go look that up. That sounds great, and it reminds me of one of the extra features on this disc is a little mini doc about the influence of Re-Animators. They talked to a bunch of like modern horror directors, including Joe Lynch, who's I think is a fabulous genre filmmaker, who made oh my gosh, what is the thing that he did with Barbara Crampton a couple years ago? Jacob's Wife.
Jacob's Wife.
Yeah.
No, this is something else. I'm gonna.
You're Next.
You're Next.
No, that was Ty West.
That's right. That's Ty West.
Oh gosh, hold on a second, everybody. I'm gonna jump to the internet because the title is on the tip of my tongue and I can't remember it. And I didn't see.
But Barbara,
this
if
movie,
you're listening, I hope you're impressed that I've name dropped you a few times and know your resume quite well.
Suitable Flesh.
Suitable Flesh. Oh, there you go.
Oh no, that was the Heather Graham. I'm sorry. Yes.
Heather Graham.
You're right. The Barbara Crampton was the one that you mentioned, Jeff. But the thing is, in this little documentary, he's talking about how, and some of the other filmmakers that they interviewed said this too. The press materials at the time this movie came out said it's H.P. Lovecraft's Re-Animator.
Right.
A lot of these people were like same age as me and maybe Mark in the early 80s, like 10 years old, 8 years old, they thought H.P. Lovecraft was the director. And they mentioned this, like, I got to go find all these other H.P. Lovecraft movies. Who is this? But when they found out it was an author, they're like, oh, this is going to get me into like reading horror books instead of just Stephen King stuff. So that's the great thing, as you mentioned, Jeff, as I'm taking the very long way to get around, is there's a difference between the nudge, nudge, wink, wink pop culture reference and the deep cut, where if you pick up on something like, wait, what is that book they just mentioned? What is that film? Who is that author that they're talking about? And you want to go out and expand your horizons. And, you know, it's beautiful. That's what I'm saying. This movie.
Well, I mean, if you look at the way they approach this film too, you're looking at, the 80s, it finally came around to the 80s, but Italian horror was doing some of the things that they do in Re-Animator 10 years prior to this. You know, so there are some nods to that. Like I said, if you watch the integral cut where where Carl Hill's doing his hypnosis thing, it's literally taken from like Dracula and from like the Hammer horror, where everything is kind of dark except the head. They don't light his eyes, but everything else except his face and he's just kind of staring, and they get mesmerized. And let's not forget, being the soundtrack guy I am, Richard Band's soundtrack. Schizo for the strings. He brings his own variation of that classic theme from Psycho here, and he does a slight variation, which, just playing that, if you don't know Psycho, you're like, oh, this is a cool song. If you know Psycho, that suddenly fits Herbert West's personality so well in this. He is so much Anthony Perkins.
He looks a little bit like him.
Yeah, I don't know how Richard Band did not get sued into oblivion.
I know, it's very close.
No mistake.
It's very close.
I didn't watch the commentary,
but it's close in two parts too. The only part that saves him, I think, is the bridge, which is kind of comical. You know, but I mean, it's got the blum 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 blum. Yeah, I mean, it's like, come on, man. When I first heard it, as we talked about when I was first in that theater, it's like, is this a kind of like a Psycho parody? I didn't get that from the trailer. But by the way, just one quick thing. As you were looking up that, Ian, I looked up the movie The Head That Wouldn't Die is known as The Brain That Wouldn't Die in some places. They had it changed, the title. In fact, if I recall, I think it says The Head That Wouldn't Die at the very end, but somehow when they changed the title to make it more skeevy sounding, they changed it only at the front and not at the back. But I think the original title of it, I think, was something like The Black Door, because there's this black door where there's this. Oh, there it is. Yeah. But it was originally called The Black Door, and then I think it was known as The Head That Wouldn't Die. But I think as it became a cult film, it got changed to The Brain That Wouldn't Die. But now you know what to look for.
I shall look that up. I love that artwork, by the way, on the DVD
Yeah, that's from the classic poster, which was the
woman in the
sci-fi poster is
the
amazing.
Woman's head in the pan. She actually gives a pretty good performance.
Mm-hmm.
She gives good. I won't say it anyway. I do want to talk.
Hill should get together with her. His soulmate is in the pan in the other room.
Yes.
Now, if we could just have a couple of pot pies for children, we'd be a nuclear family.
Oh my God.
Now I'm thinking about pot pies made of children. This is like some Hansel and Gretel stuff. But yikes. No, but I do want to, speaking of gross, we've kind of talked around it, but like this movie could only have been made in the 80s because, man, the practical gore effects from John Carl Buechler, who would go on to direct one of my favorite Friday the 13th movies, just in terms of the gore, not necessarily the film itself, because he made Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, in 1988, which notoriously got cut to ribbons by the MPAA, taking out some truly spectacular effects. But, you know, the stuff that he comes up with in this movie is just, there's a bit where Peter Kent is the cadaver, the giant muscular guy who first poses a problem and kills Dr. Halsey, and West dispatches him by taking the bone saw,
the bone saw,
right, and putting it through his back, and we actually see West kind of has him, and then it comes through his back, and then later when he's lying on the floor, you can see it coming through his chest and everything. It's it's an amazing piece of work. And the effects get just more and more over the top and crazy, leading up to that surprising scene, which I still don't understand how the intestines came to life. But there are some gore fests that just become repetitive. Like, okay, here's more blood, more guts, more splatter. But what makes a true classic, I think, like Re-Animator, is the inventiveness keeps getting ratcheted up. And in addition to just more and more gallons of blood, they're like, how can we make this interesting? Because the audience has already seen a severed head trying to go down on a naked blonde woman. Where can we go from here? And the answer is some pretty nifty places.
Well, let's not forget that our cadavers that come to life, that Hill brought to life, each one of them has like their own injury in that, like from a menagerie.
Half of the face is gone in one of them.
Well, yeah, like a menagerie of Beetlejuice characters, you know, to where, you know, they all have their own types of injuries. It's not like they're just all pasty-faced cadavers that all just have the hollowed eyes type of thing. They each one have their own type of injury. And just by presenting that, they do say, you know, the picture is worth 1,000 words. It is that. Just by looking at their injury, you're telling a little bit of a story about each one of these things. Even if they're just briefly on screen, you see the one that's all burnt. Like we said, the one that tries to choke her, his half his body is burnt. You get the one guy that's got the hole in his head because he shot himself in the head. And the only way Dan was able to dispatch him was by sticking his hand in there and ripping some of the brain out, which was an amazing.
See, there's a logic to a lot of this, which is very funny. They've kind of thought it through more than a lot of horror movies do in these circumstances.
And this direct. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, to the point both of you are making, the Peter Kent cadaver that I mentioned before, and I didn't pick up on this until I kind of rewound that scene. I'm like, what is going on with his back? Because when he stumbles out of that giant metal door, you see that he's all purple, like he's been bruised and beaten. But no, what that is when you die and you're laying on the table, all your blood starts to settle, and it settles as it does on your back. So when he's getting up and walking around, that's what we're seeing. So to your point, Jeff, it's not just like, oh, we're gonna put blood all over him. No, we're gonna make him look like an actual corpse brought back to life, and then do horrific things to him.
And let's we have to talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, Stuart Gordon himself. Here's a man who is a very talented and interesting individual as far as his filmography goes, because he would do right after this From Beyond, which is also H.P. Lovecraft, but then he would go on 3 years after doing From Beyond with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. He wrote the story to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Blew Up the Baby. And in between that, he made one of my favorite all-time B sci-fi films, Robot Jocks. Stuart Gordon. And then he made he wrote the screenplay to The Body Snatchers, which was, and then Castle Freak. He did, and then from there, he mostly stuck with the horror, although he did write the episode. He did have, based on the characters, they did the TV show based off of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. But I mean, Stuart Gordon, this is a guy who didn't just stick to horror. He did venture out into a few other things, and almost pretty much everything I've watched of his has been entertaining, whether or not he just wrote it or if he directed and wrote it. It's entertaining. So it's,
and he founded the Organic Theater here in Chicago. So he came from the Chicago theatrical scene really before he got into film.
There's the one thing I want to mention also from this, an extra on this disc. They talk about his early career and the Organic Theater. They have a still. I don't know when this was from, possibly the 70s or the 80s, but it's of the Organic Theater and a bunch of like cast and crew. Tom Tolles, who was in Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, he's like in the bottom quarter just of this random collection of people. I'm like, holy shit, that's Tom Tolles.
Interesting.
Yeah. Stuart Gordon, fantastically talented, a true like independent filmmaker and an unapologetic fan of the genre. He's one of those guys that, you become known for something, and for decades you're kind of known for that, and some people can kind of get tired of it. But he said, late in his life, towards the end, he's like, I'm going to make Re-Animator the musical. I'm going to get fully behind that and have fun with it. It's just, it speaks to his character. 15 years ago, for the 25th anniversary of Re-Animator, there were a couple of events that I attended, one of which I hosted, was a horror dinner in Minneapolis, or co-hosted it. And we actually had Bruce Abbott and Jeffrey Combs, and then Kathleen Kinmont, who played the bride of the Re-Animator in the sequel there. And it was a lot of fun hosting them. I will say that when Jeffrey Combs is on, he is on, and he's awesome. When he's off, that's all I'm going to say. But I did
actually
also
had quite an extensive career after this too. I mean, he never became a star, but he was in lots of guest shots in Star Trek and different things. He did that one man, did some stuff. I think some one man shows Poe and stuff.
And I think
Stuart, in some American Masters or horror things. I think the Carpenter did or something. Anyway,
I think Gordon was involved in that somehow too.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
I think he directed the stage play. Yeah.
But I always thought Jeffrey Combs would have been a great choice for the Riddler, because he he has this sort of rat-a-tat-tat delivery, which is very sort of old school mid-Atlantic accent, and would have been a good way to play the Riddler. But they've always sort of done a parody of the Frank Gorshin Riddler, which was great. He was a manic, crazy guy. But the best one, I think, was still on the animated series, where John Glover did the voice, and he had a little bit of that mid-Atlantic Jeffrey Combs thing going to, like, riddle me this, Batman. What would you do if you were doing this? Oh, well, that kind of thing, where he's speaking above it all because it's all an affectation.
Jeff, now I can't not think of him as the Riddler, but in that kind of Herbert West vein, where he's like, I'm smarter than all of you, and I'm surrounded by idiots, and I need someone to challenge me.
Right.
Whether that's the Mystery of Death or the Batman, the world's greatest detective.
And they still haven't done that. They still haven't really done, other than the animated series, the Riddler, who is really trying to be the smartest guy in the room and find a worthy chess opponent.
Or a chest opponent.
Or a chest opponent. Dr. Hill would know all about that.
And so would Barbara Crampton. Anyway, sorry. There was also a Horror Hound weekend where they did a Re-Animator 25th anniversary reunion, and they got like everybody who was still alive to come to that show.
Oh, wow.
So I've got this great big one sheet with like all these signatures on it. It's quite a nice art piece.
Do they still make Horror Hound magazine?
I know they do the conventions. I'm pretty sure the magazine is still.
Yeah. I've got one of their salutes to Vincent Price, one of those special, like double thick issues.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's the one thing that everything's franchises now and IPs, and I've complained about this ad nauseum on this show and Mark's show and every other show I can. They're always remaking things and spinning things off, but it's nice to be able to go back to the source of Re-Animator. And even though they made sequels, which I'm kind of a fan of the two Re-Animator sequels. They have Bride of Re-Animator, and then the third one, much like the Human Centipede, they go to prison and start doing these experiments. I don't know what was going on there.
Yes.
But they're and I think it was Screaming Mad George who did the effects for the sequels, and there's like a nice continuity of gore and shock and kind of over the top comedic, frightening stuff in there. So it's a series that is uneven in terms of, like, we had a theatrical release and then direct to video, but there is a through line with Herbert West, and even I think Dan even shows up in one of them, or he's at least referenced in some of the sequels. So it is a complete story. But going back to the source, I think for people who are tired of modern horror, and I know we're in a horror renaissance, but we're at the point now where we're already getting Megan 2.0. I think we're just about at the nadir where we're going to go back to the direct to video, like 90s Graveyard, which had its own gems, I'm sure. But yeah, you got to go back to the 80s and find when they had true craftsmen making independent films that they never thought would go anywhere. So they just went balls to the wall to make something enjoyable for themselves and, legions of would-be fans.
It's more than just looking at those films through rose-colored glasses, which some people might say. It was just a different approach to filmmaking in the late 70s, early 80s, because no one really thought of the concept of a blockbuster IP of any sorts until
especially in genre films, right?
Especially in genre films, until Star Wars kind of came along, and then it kind of planted the seeds, and then you started getting these other directors who were influenced by the serialized films when they grew up, and they were trying to do that. But one of the great interviews I always bring back to was when one of the diehards came out, and it was when Kevin Smith and Bruce Willis were on good terms. Yet he was interviewing Bruce Willis, and Bruce Willis talked about Die Hard 2 and why it's not a lot of people. He's like, that time period, people didn't know how to do sequels because you didn't really plan for an actual sequel most of the time. It was rare that any genre film was thinking it's going to get past one. Back to the Future was kind of the one of those two where they really planned ahead of time. And like I said, Star Wars kind of had that too. But the reason those stand out is because it was few and far between when you actually had a sequel. Like, hey, we're getting a sequel. Usually when you watch the sci-fi film, you're one and done. You're like, okay, that was great. And they made them, though, as if they were going to be one and done. They didn't intentionally go, oh, hey, I got this script. Hey, we can make 3 movies out of this before the first one ever sees a shot in a frame. Whereas in the 80s, they'd have the film and they go, hey, this is popular. Hey, this is getting a lot of rentals. We might be able to make another one. And you have a different, I think, approach as a creative that way versus, oh, we're going to do it this way. Because you get, I think, a little lazy in your storytelling because, oh, we'll make it up in the later films that obviously are going to be coming.
Yeah.
Well, it's a whole nother show for either one of you. Again, maybe it's a crossover thing. But if you look at a lot of the great movies that we love from the 80s or, even 60s and 70s, a lot of times there were no expectations whatsoever around those movies. I mean, 20th Century Fox had so little confidence in Star Wars that they gave George Lucas the exclusive rights to the toys and all of the stuff with it, which was amazing because it allowed him to become a billionaire and create Industrial Light and THX Sound and everything like that. But, most of the movies that succeeded, they were one-offs and they weren't even confident about it. I mean, it was only the 2 producers of Jaws who had faith that was going to do well until they did the test screenings. But everybody had lost faith in Spielberg. They had lost faith in Coppola and The Godfather, a lot of those kind of things. You hear all these stories that, until they see the put together film and somehow it's great. Wow. A lot of people don't see it. They don't have the vision and they don't plan on it becoming a hit, let alone a franchise.
Well, and that's I keep going back to the extras on this disc, but they were talking to Mick Garris, one of the masters of horror, and he had apparently seen a longer, very rough cut of Re-Animator on like a VHS tape before it came out. And he said he didn't care for it. He didn't get it. He thought it was kind of like, weird, but not in a good way. But he went to go see it when it opened in theaters. And he said that the final, Stuart Gordon's final put together, fully realized vision, he was like, wow, I did not, I admit it, I was wrong. And so I just love those kind of anecdotes and those ideas of filmmakers. We now think of these towering icons having those dark moments of doubt when they're in the middle of the production and no one believes in what they're doing. And that's got to be incredibly hard for a creative person, especially to have to plow through the rest of making the movie and getting it to the release point to prove everyone wrong, because I'm sure there are just as many cases that we probably don't even hear about of filmmakers who everyone doubts them. They get the movie out and it does tank and then they never hear from them again. But I do want to wind this down and breeze through some comments, because we have David Wilt in the house saying, I think that what makes Re-Animator a cult classic movie is it came out during the time when the classic horror movie trope, especially the crazy mad scientist, seemed to decline because most people in the 80s were starting to get into the slasher genre. Yeah, that is true. And this is a nice shining beacon of that, but there was some very kind of slashery stuff in terms of the gore and the nudity that we've already kind of talked about. So there's a bit of crossover there. The opening theme, which is a modern take on the whole Psycho theme, is such a very catchy tune. In fact, the movie came out 25 years after the movie came out and 5 years after Alfred Hitchcock had passed away. All right. Herbert West line, you won't get credit for my work. I mean, who will believe a talking head when you get a job at a sideshow is such a great and iconic line. Yes, that should be on a t-shirt if it is
Get
not
a
already.
job in a sideshow.
Get a job in a sideshow.
It's so dismissive, and he just says it with truly like disappointment. It's not even a sneer. It's more like, "Oh my God,"
But you
like
know
a
what?
bad child.
It's such a written line that I feel like Herbert West had been saving that for an occasion to use
for
it.
the right moment.
Herbert West he came up with that line long ago, but he didn't quite have the right opportunity to use it.
Right. And on a severed head, perfect.
There you go.
The movie is definitely a modern take on Frankenstein. In fact, the sequel uses the title The Bride. Yes.
Yep.
I think what makes Herbert West such a very underrated villain is that most people think of the whole mad scientist trope as you think of those characters who need a sidekick. And in the movie, he does have a sidekick, but he is not the one who is a hunchback. Yes. Yeah. His sidekick is the handsome, strapping man.
Yeah.
Speaking of Stephen King, this movie came out the same year as Cat's Eye.
Cat's Eye is a wonderful anthology film. I watched that movie.
Very underrated.
I watched that movie so many times, and it
The
ruined
the smoking thing with James Woods and Alan King is hilarious.
And that short ruined that song. I'll be watching you from the Police.
Yeah, that's right.
It ruined that song for me because I can never not think of that sequence with Alan King and that song ever. It's married. It's in my head. Yeah.
Well, to tie our podcasting universes together, I don't know if you guys caught this because last night we were talking about the Stepford Wives from 1975 on Mark's Spoiler Room podcast. Kenneth McMillan was the actor who played Baron Harkonnen in the 1984 Dune. He also played the grocery store at the owner in the Stepford Wives. Nice little cameo there.
And he's the bad guy.
And he's the bad guy in Cat's Eye.
Pushing Robert Hayes to crawl on the ledge of the building in Cat's Eye. Yeah.
And I saw Cat's Eye when it first came out on cable, so I was probably like 7 or 8 years old, and my parents are huge Airplane fans. So I was like, "What is Ted Stryker doing on this ledge with like a severed head?" And what?
Surely there must be some other way to make up this bet.
No, there are ways to make up the bet, and don't call me Shirley.
Oh, it's time for a revisit on Cat's Eye. Maybe a Halloween show.
Wonderful wraparound story of cats in that film too. I love the wraparound.
The cat is a good character throughout, helping all the right people, including little Drew at the end.
That little troll hand with the dagger.
That is Jesus.
That always freaked me
And that's
out.
of course a nod to Trilogy of Terror.
Right. Yep.
The doll that terrorizes Karen back with a knife.
Oh, I thought you were going back to the Dr. Hill Megan scene. Anyway,
it's all
same
similar.
thing. There you go.
It's all
a tongue action.
Lots of weapons jabbing at women.
Tongue in cheeks.
Nice, very nice. That should be on a t-shirt too.
Not one that I'd sell or wear. Speaking of Dracula, well, yes, I'll say it, but I won't endorse it. Maybe I just did. Anyway, David closes out with, speaking of Dracula, this movie also came out the same year as the original Fright Night. Yes, which took the whole vampire trope and rebooted it for the 80s.
Wonderful.
Oh yeah, Fright Night.
Great movie.
Sorry, we do have one more comment, gang. It wouldn't be a live stream without a lovely comment from Twitch. I have yet to see a Twitch bot on here. I'm kind of disappointed, but we have this comment from Medium Ugly Code Gen M. Best viewers on streamboo.com. Remove the space. What? No.
That's a bot.
It's not. It's
a bot.
It's totally organic. Everybody loves Streamboo, and they keep coming in here to recommend it. Oh, anyway.
Streamboo.
Oh, yeah, there you go. We'll bring that up in the Halloween shows. Hey. But anyway, guys, thank you for hanging out. We are almost exactly at the runtime of the original Re-Animator.
There you go.
Hour and 24 minutes. Yeah. But yeah, I appreciate you hanging out. Appreciate you, the live viewers, for coming in and out of the program, and those who have stuck with us the entire time. We definitely appreciate it. And yeah, this has been 40 years of Re-Animator. Definitely a classic. And again, this is not a plug, but it's also not a plug for the Ignite Films 4K release. It's got like 3 or 4 audio commentaries, a bunch of making of stuff. And if you just love Re-Animator, it looks gorgeous. I mean,
it does. It's beautiful. That transfer is,
the close-ups, and this is also a testament to Buechler's makeup work. When they have the close-ups of Dr. Hill's head in the pan, you get to see every, crevice and tear and blood droplet. It doesn't look like he's wearing makeup. You don't see the seams or anything. It's very, very eerie. It's sufficiently scary. But yeah. So anyway, thank you for hanging out. Thank you, Jeff York of the Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists, and of course, again, the lovely thumbnail for this episode. Folks, check it out. And also Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck of Special Mark Productions and the Spoiler Room. Yeah, guys, next week we're going to be back with something. I don't exactly know what that is yet, but we'll be talking about something live. We've got some options, but yeah, my head is all over the place in terms of the calendar. I have no sense of time anymore for reasons that are obvious and perhaps not. But yeah, anyway, everybody, thank you very much for hanging out. If you like this show, please like, subscribe, and all that business. Be sure and support all of Earth's Mightiest Critics, whose information is down below. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much and take care. And now I'm going to end the stream, which I should have done before my valedictory. Yeah, let's try that.